Hi everybody, Bryan Armentrout here with the Food Safety Chat Live on a very special edition. So as you can tell, we are not in my normal office. We are actually in Christchurch, New Zealand, believe it or not. And so with that, I could not pass up the opportunity to meet with Steve Ardagh, who is the president of Eagle. And how are you doing today, Steve?
I'm well, thank you for coming all this way to visit us. It's very kind of you. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of this is you have a very unique business, and I've been learning about this, and your team and you do a really, really good job on LinkedIn of giving information. And you really got me thinking about an area that, as someone who works in food safety for my whole career, you really don't give a whole lot of thought to, and that's gloves.
Yep, absolutely, and that's always been the challenge. So we've been going almost 20 years now in New Zealand. We started in 2006. We supply around 80% of the New Zealand meat processing industry, or primary food industry, which is meat, seafood, that sort of thing, dairy. We decided in 2016, I think it was, to move to the States and try and save the US food sector one glove at a time. And we're progressing well. We've got some really great customers, but it's always been a hard slog, to your point, that people just don't think about gloves. It's not that they don't want to, it doesn't even cross their mind.
Yeah, it's just something that you assume is there, and I think that's kind of the one of the main things in food safety that we do, is people just assume that the things are there and that they work, and then they don't, and then they're surprised, and these things all sneak up on you. So one of the things that we do on the chat, and I'm going to annoy you with this because I annoy all my guests with this, is you have to endure the dad joke.
That's fine.
All right. Steve, what did one tectonic plate say when it bumped into the other?
Right, I see that's a very topical joke for Christchurch, which has been, you'll have seen over the last couple of days, has been largely rebuilt since 2010. But I hate to think, but I'm willing to hear.
Well, of course they're very polite, so they said, sorry, my fault.
Yeah, very good. Okay, I'll save that one. Yeah.
For appropriate times. So you mentioned earlier, and I like your tagline for the company, we're changing the world one glove at a time. And that's a good one, right? And this really is, and that's kind of how food safety works, is you have to change hearts and minds slowly over time. And really, especially in my field with consulting and working with clients, it's building that relationship, building that trust, getting them to understand. We'll get a little bit more into this as well too, with the ROI associated with these things, because as I'm sure you see this quite a bit in your business as well, is the idea of the budget, right? Oh, I can't do this. My budget only has this much money in it, and you're always fighting against that. So with your company, we'll kind of start here kind of at the beginning, is how did you choose gloves? It's such a unique niche market. How did you get into this?
Well, I say the same thing to everyone, is doesn't everyone want to grow up and be the glove guy? You know? I mean, it's just one of those things. But I'm qualified in agriculture, agricultural research is where I came from. Did that for many years, probably went through one of my midlife crises, depending on who you're talking to. Decided to become a marketing consultant, did that for several years, and I was working a lot with restaurants, and I just loved the whole sort of vibe of restaurants and hospitality. You know, they never paid their bills, but I mean they were it was great places to, you know, they paid for the food and then the beer and then everyone else comes next. But so in my marketing consultancy days, I was working with companies that worked in this space, and I just saw the opportunity. I thought it wasn't being done very well. It was very lazy, and still is. Most 90% of people who supply PPE and gloves into the food industry just don't do a good job. They just sell a box, you know, they buy it for $1, sell it for $1.50 without much thought. So we wanted to start a business, Linda and I, that also gave people something, you know, worthwhile doing, something that was they wanted to do, that they felt proud of doing. And as silly as gloves are, we made it that. So we believe very much that we're saving lives. We're saving huge amounts of waste. Our other byline, if you like, is giving people less of a better product. So we give them a better glove that actually works. It doesn't need to rip, and it does the job, makes someone's hands feel comfortable as they can during the day, because it's a tool of trade.
Yeah.
So and then, you know, it sort of grew from there, and we became a certified B Corp, which you'll know well in Colorado, but because there's a lot of them there. But you know, that was around ethical sourcing and the way we did business, and how we improved that. And so that's been a big part of the business as well, and probably was a good part of the reason we went to the States, because we had some good relationships in the US with B Corps, and got over there and looked at the business over there, and it's huge. I mean, the US uses 328 million gloves a day across all the industries, and that's pre-pandemic, so goodness knows what it is now. But so we believe probably 25% of those gloves never get used because of poor quality. They rip as they get put on. So that's millions and millions of gloves that never actually get used, that still go in the ground.
Yeah.
So how do we reduce that waste? And it's by getting a better product.
I've done that myself, right? You're putting the glove on and it tears. You're like, ugh, and you take it off and you grab another one. It's just total waste. I really like what you said just a little bit ago too, which is you have to buy the right tools.
Yeah.
And if you work in any type of industry that your livelihood is around tools, so maintenance men or contractors or anything like that, you're only as good as your tools. And if you're buying low quality gloves, you're shortchanging yourself and you're putting a low quality tool in the hands of your people, and it's not going to work.
Totally.
Cutting corners never works, and that lesson is always really difficult. So where are your gloves made, and how does that work?
Yeah, well, they're made in, all of our gloves now are made in Malaysia and Thailand. We've been to, I've been visiting factories for 20 years. I've been to hundreds of factories probably, and we've chosen what we think are the best available. I've been to some terrible factories, and I can tell you some stories about that if you want to, but but the very, very first factory I went to, which I will tell you, was in, well, I won't say which country it was in. It's actually just gone bankrupt in the last couple of years, so it's taken a while. Went around the factory, and it's really noisy, and it's hard to describe. But I went to the packing room, and it smelt heavily of chlorine and acid, which is part of the process. It had no walls, it just was a roof. So here's these ladies, as it was at the time, a huge pile of gloves on each table, and they're packing them into, they put them in bags, lots of 25, and then put them in a box of 100, 4 lots. And one guy's job was walking around the room getting rid of the flies and cockroaches off the piles of gloves. And they're going into medical grade boxes. And of course, none of that's a problem, because FDA food compliance doesn't require gloves to be clean or intact.
Right.
The food compliance is purely around chemical composition and migration. But nobody checks anyway. So the FDA food compliance is a one-off test done by the factory, and then the gloves just come into the country, and we know that gloves come in with carcinogens and all sorts of illegal or bad chemicals. So, so there's some really, really good factories out there though, and there's a lot better automation these days and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit less of the problem, but there's still some serious issues with glove contamination and glove quality.
Well, yeah, I mean, you brought up a really good point there too that I want to emphasize, is that in what you do and what I do and with anybody who's dealing with food safety or food quality, there's these certain building blocks that you have to have, and you brought up a couple of those I think are really important, is you have to know your suppliers, and you have to visit them. If you have a key supplier, you have to go and visit. You can learn so much. I was working with a company in the past, we were making coconut milk, and I didn't know anything about coconut milk, but I had to fly to the Philippines to go and visit the suppliers, and luckily through contacts I had in Australia, we were able to find a former QA manager for coconut milk manufacturing who joined us on the tour of the facility. And we got about halfway through, and I'm like, people, cutting the edge, with their feet, using machetes and cutting off the husks. And I'm just looking around going, oh my. And I asked her at one point, I'm like, is this normal? And she's like, right? And you would never know that. When I talked with the owner of the company before I flew out there, he presented his food safety plan, and I started asking him questions on the phone. And he said, hey, listen, Bryan, I got to tell you, I went to the local university and had some students write this for me because I knew that you needed this in the United States, right? Red flag, and that's why I was there. So we were able to catch that and then prevent potential issues in the future. And we found, to your point, we found good suppliers in Malaysia who were doing the correct things. And number one is you have to let your suppliers know that you're watching them. To your point, if you're not paying attention, you're not watching them, they're going to do things that may be cutting corners. And I think a lot of people in the US, and you made some very good points there, and some of your papers that you've written, and I'll put some links in here after for this interview, of the studies you've been involved with the pathogens and the other things that they're findings on these gloves. It's just like, oh my God. And okay, fine, the latex that you're using in the gloves, the chemicals that you're using are an approved, that's a very low bar, right? You have to do a lot better than that.
Yeah, well, there's so many things that I could talk to there, but I mean, there's a couple of really good points. One is the factories. The glove industry is like the rag trade was, in that there's huge amounts of labour, bad labour relations, labour issues. During the pandemic, the CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol, banned 6 different factories out of Malaysia I think 5 were Malaysia, 1 Thailand, from exporting into the US, which was a big call when gloves were so sought after. And one of them was the largest company in the world, and they've had multiple infringements. And it's just an area that people don't look at, you know. And we've got some really good customers who spend a lot of time auditing the factories, either through us or separate to us, which is great. That's what we want, because that's important. But the other thing is that the glove manufacturing process uses a lot of water, and water is a huge scourge to the food industry in terms of if it's dirty, there's a problem. The water that often is used on the gloves is dirty, so it introduces pathogens and other contaminants. And we know that through the study you said, and I can go into more detail, but it's just, you know, we know that 30% of gloves tested either had Listeria on or had more than 1 million CFUs per box of gloves of various pathogens. We found E. coli and Salmonella, Aspergillus, which is a fungus, which is there's been a documented case where Aspergillus and contaminated gloves killed a couple of prenatal kids through this fungus contamination. So, you know, it's serious business, but it's just getting that, you know, and I'd love to ask food safety people, and I do all the time, what can we do to get you to look at this seriously? Because you've been taught for years and years and years that a glove is just a glove. But we're saying it's not. You know, there's 2 things. You want to match the right glove for the right process, but you also want to make sure that the quality control going way back to the factory, and the staff that attend the factory and the environmental impact and all these things is aligned with your values.
And 2 good points in that as well is, so in the United States, there's laws on the books there for making sure that your suppliers are not using child labor. Those would come across my desk all the time, and you're like, well, of course we're not using child labor, but to your point, are you checking? Like, what are these factories doing? And if they're producing a commoditized product where the bottom dollar is the one that wins, they're going to have a highly motivated sense to do those type of things. And according to the law in the US, you need to be checking for that. So if child labor and other unsavory practices are being done in this field, you need to know about it. And you said, what, 330 million gloves a day?
Give or take.
That's something that you need to be paying attention to as part of your supplier program. So that's a really important thing to think about.
Well, it's huge, and it's like every single person in the US gets touched by a glove, directly or indirectly, every day. If you're eating food, they're not, you know, your food's been handled with gloves, whether it be a Subway or a burger or a steak or whatever it happens to be, or you go to a medical section.
I was thinking of Subway exactly. You go into Subway and they got those crappy looking semi-transparent.
That, I mean, to be fair to them, it's actually a reasonable choice, because as long as they're swapping them out. That's the main thing. Or you go into a place and they're using that for 30 or 40 minutes. It's a waste of time. It's like wearing nothing. Well,
and there was always a couple assumptions from what I saw in the food industry is the workers on the floor always assumed the gloves were sterile. They would reach in the box, put them on, and then start working. I'd be like, whoa, what are you doing? So no, it's okay, these gloves are sterile. I'm like, no, they're not. And they'd look at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you need to go over, clean the gloves, put on sanitizer, and then start your work. And, you know, they'd roll their eyes and then go back to what they were doing. So it was a constant fight for me on that side when I would go visit my plants.
It's interesting because I was just reading something yesterday actually about vinyl gloves, which we hate as a company because vinyl gloves are the scourge of the world for a lot of reasons. The US uses about 90% of the world's production of vinyl gloves. Japan banned them for food handling, I think, in about 2001. Europe banned them across all sorts of areas in 2008. Most other countries don't use them anymore for food handling. They're full of chemicals, PFAS, phthalates, potentially BPA. When they're made, they make Agent Orange. When they're put in the ground, they release Agent Orange, and they're not food safe. There's a paper done by Ansell, actually, Ansell Europe, about 15 years ago, that showed that over 50% of vinyl gloves, when they're put on, have micro tears and holes big enough for pathogens to pass through both ways. So if your worker's got a bit of norovirus and he didn't wash his hands very well, then it goes through the glove onto the food. And vice versa if it's the other way around. So I mean, it's just one of those things that I think, you know, it's getting that awareness to think about this. It's a Zone 1 food safety item. It should be treated like that, like any surface or a cutting board or a knife or whatever it happens to be. But the irony is people will often go around and swab everything wearing gloves, but they don't actually swab the glove. And so But the reason, the connection for the alcohol is vinyl won't stand up to alcohol very, very well. So if you're using hand sanitizer, which is a good idea on nitrile gloves to give them that clean, it's maybe not a good idea with vinyl gloves because it'll disintegrate them slowly and make them even more vulnerable.
Okay, so part of this within food safety and quality assurance is education. We need to be the group in production facilities that are ahead. So I like to tell people who work in that field that you need to be the ones thinking about the future. What are the things you should be worrying about that nobody else has really thought about? And this is really a prime example here. So what I'm hearing so far, Steve, then is that vinyl gloves, super bad. So in the food industry, for different types of industries, what type of gloves do work? What are good gloves?
Well, there's mostly nitrile gloves these days because they've got so much cheaper, and nitrile is a synthetic latex, so it's not latex, and latex are a great glove. But unfortunately, some people have allergies to them, and the allergy can be passed on with the food. So you've got to be careful. And a lot of states in the US now don't allow you to handle food with latex gloves for that reason, which is a shame because they're probably the best option, and are still used a lot in medical. Obviously for surgeons and things, very tactile and relatively environmentally friendly in terms of biodegradability. But nitriles have come a long way. We've got one of our nitrile is used in one of the largest big box stores in the States, using them 7 years, and it's as light. When we first gave it to them, they said that'll never do. It's like tissue paper, but it's strong. It's fit for purpose. You wouldn't fix a car with it, but it does the job when you're putting deli meat together or whatever.
Right.
And they're really cost effective.
Okay.
For some jobs, you can get what they call TPE, which is a version of the glove that the likes of Subway use. It's slightly stronger, but it's for short use, so it's only 10 minutes. So if you're making a sandwich or cutting some ham, it's perfect for that. But you wouldn't use it longer than that because it'll start to break down and become, and they're not very comfortable. As I said before, these are tools of trade. Yeah. And one of the sectors we deal with in New Zealand is the dentists. And dentists, apologies to any dentists out there, can be fairly frugal for all that they charge. But when they get a glove that they like, they stick to it because they're wearing it all day, every day. And if a glove's not fitting properly, it can give them all sorts of hand issues, and and they want to be able to hold on to their drill.
So if it's like compressing too much.
Yeah. So and that's really important because that can cause all sorts of repetitive strain injuries and that sort of thing. So there's all these things to think about, and there's lots of options available of all prices and fittings and everything. So putting a glove together it's like a cake mix. It depends what you're making, and so you can add different ingredients to make them stronger, harder, softer, or stretchier, not stretchy, all these sort of things. So we try and design a glove, if you like, for a particular purpose.
Now, I'd heard in the past, so people have allergens, allergic to latex, right? And then there was also something I'd heard in the past about powders. They would add powders to gloves to help facilitate. Do they still do that? Very rarely. I mean, the FDA stopped medical gloves, surgical gloves, having powder a couple of years ago, so that's not allowed anymore. Very few people would have powder gloves. They use nowadays they use a polymer coating on the inside of the glove. So when the glove's made, the outside is the inside, so it's going through the baths and it gets. Oh yeah, I've seen those videos. Yeah, so you got the hand molds and then they go in and And then when they take it off, they pull it off and they pull it inside out, which is actually the right way around for where you've got to wear it. Because the texture's on the former, and so that's going to be on the outside. Okay. So then you. So that's one of the tests we do. We do microbial counts on every lot of gloves that come into the US. One of the tests we do that no one else has ever done is we test the inside of the glove, because that's actually the part that was exposed to the water during the washing process. And captures the pathogens and contaminants. So to your point earlier, the Pseudomonas and Listeria and other things. I worked in a clean room for a couple of years when I first started my career, and Pseudomonas was the hardest thing. Pseudomonas, Aspergillus, all those families, the hardest thing to kill in the clean room. We would throw all kinds of chemicals, do our testing, and it would still be there. Well, that's the frustration that I have, and I understand that food safety people in particular don't need another problem. And we're coming to them with another problem, which we try and turn into a solution as quickly as we can. But we're saying to them, you do all this stuff to keep Listeria out of your plant. You make sure the drains are clear. No dripping water, all these sort of things that got boar's head in trouble. Yet you've got this unverified thing that comes into the plant, in hundreds of millions that may or may not have Listeria on it. It's something as so in the past, if you have an environmental hit and you do your vector analysis and you're looking around the plant. I never thought, maybe it's the gloves. Never even crossed my mind.
Well, we've got one really good case study that was publicised from Freer Farms, which is a cannabis producer in Washington State, and they got a recall initiated by the authorities because they found a carcinogen on the glove. On the product. They tested everything and eventually traced it back to the glove. And they tested it twice because they couldn't believe it, and because the carcinogen shouldn't have been in the glove, because if it had FDA food compliance, which it did, but no one checks, so
wink,
and all that sort of thing. And the guy said, the worst thing is my staff have been wearing this for 8 hours a day, with a carcinogen on the glove. And I said, it's worse than that. That glove, and I won't say the brand, that glove is used by probably 20 or 30% of the food industry, and they're not checking. So they're wearing a glove that could have a carcinogen on it, and no one's checking.
Yeah.
And so it's just that sort of loose, regulatory stuff. And I don't blame the FDA. The FDA's compliance is specifically aimed at chemical content and migration.
Right.
Where the problem is, no one's checking on arrival because of there's not enough people to do that, and the cost will be prohibitive. But also the people assume in the food industry and medical industry, for that matter, that it means the gloves are clean as well, which it's not required to be.
Well, and that's always the hardest part of supplier evaluation and control, is figuring out what to test for. And so a lot of the things that you're listing at that could be potential issues on gloves, so chemical, microbiological, that's an expensive laundry list of things to test for. So if I was to send out all right, I want all chemical analysis, I want benzene, I want carcinogens, that's going to cost you, $5,000 just for the chemical analysis on that piece. And if you thought you were saving money on your gloves, that's gone.
Well, that's what we say. And we provide this free with every lot. We test it. We've got a QR code on the side of the box that you can scan. It gives you all the test results. It tells you where the glove came from, when it left that port, when it arrived in the US, all the other information about the glove. So, again, we're trying to take that job away from the food safety people or the QA people. Yeah. We can actually supply you with a glove that's had that verification done.
So, that's very interesting from that side. So, with that then, so part of this is, my experience, I'm kind of curious to get your take on, putting my hat on as a quality manager in a plant and the type of things that I've always seen, that you're seeing these things too, if there's anything that I missed on these, is we already talked a little bit about, people think that the gloves are sterile and that they're protecting themselves with this magical barrier. I can't count the times I've seen somebody say, oh no, I've got gloves on. That's right. And you're just like, oh my God, what are you doing? Yeah. They think that they can do anything. It's just, I dropped that on the floor. Okay, I'll just pick that up and bring it back because I've got gloves on. So you mentioned earlier too, with like retail foods, fast foods and things like that, the gloves are only supposed to be on for 10 minutes. Yeah. So that then really becomes a training issue for those guys. Yeah. So what type of methods have you seen in production facilities for food plants to train their employees on the proper interval for changing gloves? Because normally what I see is they'll change them when they change their shifts. Yep. They'll wear them as long as they can until they tear. Yep. And that doesn't sound like the correct way to do it.
No, we know that gloves break down over time. It's like anything. If you keep bending it, things are going to break down over time depending on the material. Mm-hmm. So to your point, those TPE gloves or the PE gloves, they're a 5-10 minute or less job. You can put one on, grab a hunk of meat,
chop, and then
do it, and then get rid of them. 100% recyclable usually if you've got that facility, and so they don't need to be a waste, and they're much lighter, much cheaper, so they're a good option. The nitrile gloves aren't recyclable, and some people are saying they're biodegradable, but we don't think that's actually working yet. Mm-hmm. It will come. So the idea for us is to get the lightest possible glove that will do the job, and that's what we've done when I was mentioning that before. Okay. And we saved one company over £1 million of waste every year just by replacing their 4.8 gram vinyl glove with a 2.8 gram nitrile glove, and it works better. But I guess to your point as well, so we call the glove the canary in the coal mine for food safety. So when people like Frank Giannis talk about food safety culture, I say, well, if you want to tell what a company cares about food safety, look at the glove the frontline workers wearing. Is it the cheapest possible rubbish that they can find, or is it something that's actually been put some thought into and is a good tool of trade for those workers? Mm-hmm. And I go into, and I won't mention them, but I've been into various ready-to-eat places in the States, and I walk straight out because I see the glove they're using, and it's like, I know that behind the scenes it's going to be bad because they don't care about the front end. And so that's really just getting that across, is that this is a tool of trade for these guys. Mm-hmm. They've got to be comfortable. Good gloves don't sweat as much. They feel so much better. They don't cramp your hands. it's easy to do the job, whatever you're doing. And so I had this experience way back, which I won't mention the company, but I went in and they're a large company and they're having problems with vinyl gloves. And so they said we're probably ripping, 10% of them, and I said it's probably a bit more than that. And they did a test across 6 locations. They said you were wrong, it's 25%. We're losing 25% of gloves before we even wear them. And I was talking to one of the supervisors and I said, where are your gloves? And she pulled them out of her pocket and said, I keep them here. And I said, well, you can't do that, you'd be shut down if an inspector came in. And she said, but I can't walk all the way back to the dispensing station and do all that, it takes too long. And I said, but why is that voluntary? Is it voluntary to close the door at night and lock it? Is that something that you let slip as well? And so to your point, if you've got process in place that people understand the reason for, the reason you swap your gloves out after 2 hours in the meat industry is because usually you're taking a break, but that's how long they'll last safely.
Yeah.
If you're making sandwiches, it's 5 minutes or 2 minutes. If you're packing fig bars that one of our customers does, you can usually last sort of an hour or 2 depending on the shift length. So it depends on the work being done. But you do the same with the knives, or you do the same with your chemicals or your cloths or your buckets. I mean, you just have a process, and it's just getting that process in place and people understanding why it's there.
Yeah, I mean, because part of this, and this is always what needs to happen in the food industry, is one of the things I always talk about, Steve, is you have to be able to be technical in what you do, and kind of like the things that we're talking about today, and get a good base understanding of these things. But you have to be able to sell it.
Yeah.
So what are some tips out there for people who are listening, who are hearing what we're saying today and saying, oh man, I really need to talk with my boss about this and start talking about it? What are some things that they can say? What are some ROI type tools that they can use to start conversations with their plant manager or whoever's paying the bill?
Yep. I remember going to a meat plant in northern New Zealand years and years ago, and I was talking to the workers, and I don't know if you've been into a meat processing plant, but some of them can be fairly rural, for want of a better term, and they were saying, oh, new gloves, they'll just be the cheapest SHIT we can get. And I said, actually, they're spending more money on gloves because they want you guys to have a really good tool of trade. And they just went like this, all of a sudden, they said they're spending more money. And it just struck me that if you go into a plant and say, we're looking for the best possible, pick what it is, but best possible glove for you, straight away that means you're serious about food safety and the workers and everything. And I think that's one of the biggest returns on investment in terms of getting those people to respect the process and respect what you're doing by saying we're spending more money on you, so you've got a good tool to do your job. But the fact is they're not spending more money because the overall cost of a glove from us, in our view, is less per month than using something that's not going to do the job, or it hinders their productivity. I mean, if they follow process, they've got to, if a glove rips, they've got to go back to the dispensing station, wash their hands, dry their hands, put on 2 more gloves, assuming they don't rip, and then go back to the station. It's
like you said earlier, if you're losing 25%, you're fooling yourself, because now, that's money down the drain right there.
That's the trouble often between the procurement department and other departments, is that he's got a spreadsheet to look at, and she's looking at other things, and so it's just it's getting that communication and understanding what they're looking at.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. To me, it's Darren Detweiler talks about the cost of doing nothing.
Yeah.
Which I love that, and the cost of doing nothing with gloves for a long time for Boar's Head, for 15 years, was nothing until it was a lot.
Right.
And the damage to the brand, but the cost of everything else that's gone on, whatever they saved on processes or gloves or who knows what it was, is long forgotten.
Yeah, I use the phrase, and I always watch for this when I have clients or I visit facilities, is if I'm having discussions like this and management says something along the lines of, we've never really had a problem before. That's a huge warning sign.
Well, we talk about things like O-rings on space shuttles and Boar's Head, and I feel sorry for Boar's Head because they used as an example a lot, but I mean, maybe they deserved it at that stage, but hopefully with the new crew they've got on board, that's changing, which I'm sure it is. But I mean, it's just that there's no sort of half foodborne illness or half recall.
Right.
It's either recall or not, and so you get no warning. You come to work one day and someone's ringing you up saying one of people got listeria from your ice cream or whatever it was, and that's, your whole world's just changed.
Yeah, and I've been in those situations. I've managed large class 1 recalls, and at those point in times, it is will the company survive or not, right? And you should never get to that position. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is keep companies from getting to that position. So as we're kind of closing out our conversation here around this, what kind of closing thoughts do you have for people, and what advice would you like to give them?
I think talk to us is the first thing, because we love telling our story, as you're probably aware, and we're trying to raise the awareness. But our goal is to save the US food sector one glove at a time, which sounds a bit arrogant, but we don't care if it's our glove or somebody else's glove. There's some really good glove companies out there who are raising the bar a little bit as well, and we're trying to raise the bar across the industry and get rid of maybe those people who just think this is a tradable commodity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Zone 1 food safety item, and in medical, it's even, that's another whole story as well in terms of hospital-acquired infection and those sort of things. But it's just treat it as a Zone 1 food safety item. Take the time to look at where you're getting the product from, evaluate the supplier, evaluate the product, evaluate the material behind it. In terms of certifications, that's pretty easy to print up a SGS certificate somewhere or whatever, as was shown through the pandemic. A lot of good counterfeit stuff. So it's just taking care. And then after that, we've got a really, really good customer who we've had for 7 or 8 years, and they're one of the largest retailers in the country, and they don't pay more than they need to, but they've been with us because they know they get a really competitive product that just works, and they can get on with their real job, which is doing other stuff, other things. And so, we often say our super hero capability has been invisible, because that's all that a procurement person wants and a food safety person wants, is the gloves to turn up, be well priced, just work, and then, as I say, they can get on doing
one less thing to worry about.
Yeah,
it always comes back to, and that's one of the main things in food safety, it's not necessarily the things that you know about that are the issue, it's the things that you don't think about. And that's really been, I think, our conversation here today, is those type of things. So if people want to get a hold of you, Steve, and learn more about your products and your process and more education, which has been fantastic. I've learned a ton here today, thank you. How would people get a hold of you?
Well, it's eagleprotect.com. We're all over the internet. My name and Eagle Protect's all over the internet. We're on LinkedIn, and we're pretty active there, as you know.
Yeah.
We're on Facebook and Instagram. We've got a really good Instagram of a couple of the ladies in the States saying, "Would you lick your glove?" And they demonstrate that they would. And that's actually a really good, I don't think many people, knowing what I know, I certainly wouldn't, would lick their glove. They were proud to do that. So I mean, we've got some good stuff going on. But and if you're going to link my email and stuff, people feel free to contact me.
Okay, well,
I'm in New Zealand at the moment, but I'm in the States a lot. So in fact, I'm in there in a couple of weeks at the Food Safety Summit.
Nice.
We're presenting there, and we have a booth. So if anyone's there, please come and visit us as well.
Perfect. Fantastic. Well, thank you, Steve. I've really enjoyed this.
Me too. Thanks.
And kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.